teachers must have had to experience.
Okay, it'd be interesting to hear some teachers' points of view. Email me, the panel at rnz.co.nz, and I'll read out a couple tomorrow. I'm going to end on this one. Simon, you might have ideas on this. Sausage rolls, sushi, sandwiches, crab rolls. No, I'm just making that up. Auckland local boards have spent $1 million on catering over the last 5 years. That's according to figures provided to staff. Auckland Council says the catering is for board meetings, community events, workshops, etc. One board chairman called the amount astonishing and will be following up on the matter. Other members from a number of boards said the spending was justified. Some said it was too much. Simon, are you having crab rolls?
The media aren't allowed. They feed themselves, but not the media who are there. And I've seen the food they eat, and it's boring and cheap food, honestly. There are a lot of meetings, and they do it as part of that functionality of keeping the group together and keeping them engaged, not having them wander off. Having said that, $1 million over 21 boards over 5 years when they're meeting almost every day or all the time, all-day meetings very commonly. I don't think that's a lot. Having said that, the Waitemata local board only spent a couple of $1,000, much, much less than the others. So they're doing something differently, and you've got to think either at one end or at the other of the spectrum something's going wrong. Maybe Waitemata are not keeping their people going properly. Maybe the others need to learn from them.
So from a Māori perspective, kai is absolutely critical at a gathering. It is how the tangata whenua, the people of that place, show and respect the mana of manuhiri, the guests. To have a gathering without the sharing of kai is to undermine the quality of the relationship. So I actually applaud a budget being set aside, particularly for community events, for what I call kai, hospitality, catering. Having said that, I really want to see local boards walking their talk and spending more and investing more in social procurement. So that means instead of using the large corporate sausage roll dispensing companies because they're cheap and cheerful, spend your money on local communities, reflect the diversity of your community by using local caterers, local foods,
what a great
and local
angle.
flavours.
What a great... That's an article right there, Simon.
Well, there will be issues around the rules around procurement, of course, because they've got to look at value for money and costs and all the rest of it. But I think Ella's absolutely right.
That's a fantastic
local
point.
boards should be supporting local community-based enterprises.
Blow the sausage rolls. If I can procure some local goods from that particular community, why wouldn't I do that?
Well, you've got to, as Simon said, you've got to have to take health and safety. They've got to be a real company. But there are lots and lots of community organisations, NGOs, small businesses in all of our right around the country. And why not spend, and $200,000 a year is not a lot, even though it's and clearly out in Waitemata they don't care about kai being about cementing relationships. Or maybe they have sausage sizzles and everybody brings a plate, which is also another way. Bring a plate to a community meeting.
Well, what's wrong with that? Because that's what, the church gatherings that Dad used to host. It was bring a plate. Everyone bought a plate. It was a fantastic feast. What about that? Why do we need to spend $1 million? Why didn't we?
Over 5 years, over 21 boards.
It's not much.
It's not a lot of money.
No, but I do think, as the biggest city, we should have a dedicated budget. And Auckland Council does have a social procurement policy. I've seen little evidence of it being implemented around key, services that they could be buying locally.
Okay, fair enough. You have both been a wonderful panel.
Thank you, Wallace.
Lots of response today. Ella, Henry, Simon Wolfson, thanks for joining us. I'm back tomorrow, 3:45. See you then. Checkpoint now. Bye.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, it's time to go. The Prime Minister announces our troops will be out of Iraq by mid-next year. A midwife could face legal action after lying to a woman in labour and giving her saline instead of pain relief. So why is her identity being kept secret when she's still working with pregnant women? 15 people injured in the Mosque shootings will need ongoing surgery for years. The impact on them and the Christchurch hospital is huge. Murupara residents are feeling short-changed after thieves pinched their cash machine. Are they going to get another one? And US Border Protection is slammed for putting a 9-year-old Cook Island tourist in a detention centre.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. New Zealand will end its training mission in Iraq, but not until next year. There are currently up to 95 troops at Camp Taji training Iraqi security forces. New Zealand's deployment will end by June 2020. It's been working with Australia in joint missions since 2015. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern extended the Iraq and Afghanistan deployments last September, but they were reduced in size. She says the mission says the Iraq deployment will continue to get smaller before winding up altogether.
In 2015, New Zealand made a commitment to the Iraqi government to train the Iraqi security forces to help rid Iraq of the global terrorist threat posed by ISIS. Within the next 12 months, New Zealand will have fulfilled that commitment, and the current non-combat training mission involving 95 personnel at Taji will end.
Jacinda Ardern says the Afghanistan deployment will be reduced slightly and its focus changed to involve women in peace and security initiatives. The insurance industry says if people want lower premiums, they need better buildings that can be more easily fixed after a disaster. Wellington's mayor says a task force is being set up to look at how the insurance market is functioning following sharp rises in premiums. An insurance expert, Melissa Heath, says New Zealand's now the second riskiest country in the world, and the risk-based pricing actually brings some premiums up to a more realistic level.
The problem we're facing is that the ability to repair New Zealand buildings is almost impossible economically. We have built ourselves buildings in the most terrible places and to terrible standards, and they cannot be repaired easily or economically.
Melissa Heath says people have become too complacent about where and how they build because insurance hasn't been priced according to risk. The first police officers at the scene of a fatal shooting in Mangere have described trying to find out what happened from the sole survivor. Abraham Tu'uheava was shot dead and his wife Yolanda was severely injured on Greenwood Road in May last year. It's the Crown's case that Fisilau Tapaivalu and Mesui Tufui are on trial in the High Court in Auckland, lured the couple to the rural road to kill them with a third man who has already pleaded guilty. This afternoon, Detective Constable Samuel Hensman relayed to the jury what Mrs. Tu'uheava said to him in the ambulance and hospital.
She said the offenders were two brothers and that they were Mangere locals. Her husband told her that they are drug dealers, and he said he was going to buy a bag of hard stuff for $5,500. Her husband was shot first.
Mrs. Tu'uheava, who has a bullet in her brain, gave evidence last week but struggled to remember some details and needed frequent breaks. A former Labour Party president believes two dramatically different poll results released last night will shake the public's faith in polls. The One News Colmar Brunton poll had National up 4 points to 44 and Labour down 6 to 42. Yet the News Hub Reid Research poll put Labour on nearly 51% and National 37%. Mike Williams says the polling methodology needs to be reassessed.
Your faith must be shaken when you see two polls that are, literally poles apart. Certainly the credibility of polls must be falling away, and it must be damaging the whole industry. The problem is that it's getting very difficult to capture a representative sample.
A former Labour Party president, Mike Williams. Business owners in a small Bay of Plenty town say they'll fight to keep cash flowing in and out of its only bank. New Zealand Credit Union, the only bank operating in Motu, hasn't been able to handle cash since the town's single ATM was ripped from its walls by thieves last week. Marina Teddy, who owned a takeaway shop, says a fully functioning bank is vital.
It's a big loss to our community, especially for our old people who some of them can't even travel into Rotorua, even though we have buses running from here. And businesses, all bushmen, everybody, we're going to suffer big time.
Murupara residents will meet tonight to discuss the problem, but it's not clear if credit union representatives will be there. 3 new cases of measles have been reported in Northland this week, taking the total number in the region to 9. The DHB says none of the patients aged between 25 and 58 were immunised. One is in intensive care. A Sudanese refugee detained on Papua New Guinea's Manus Island for nearly 6 years by Australia has been granted asylum in Switzerland. Abdul Aziz Muhammad fled Sudan in 2013 but was detained for travelling by boat to Australia, where he sought asylum. In February, he was given a special visa to enter Switzerland when he won a global award for human rights defenders. Mr Muhammad says he'll continue to fight for the freedom of about 850 refugees still held by Australia on Manus and Nauru.
And the fight has just started. I have no idea how long this fight will take, but I can assure you this fight will never be completed until the last person will leave the island of Manus or Nauru.
A former Manus Island refugee, Abdul Aziz Muhammad. It's 5:05. All Blacks lock Brodie Retallick is back for the Chiefs for their must-win game against the Melbourne Rebels this weekend. Retallick, who's been out of Super Rugby for 8 weeks recovering from a wrist injury, says it's been tough watching on the sideline, but he's used the time wisely.
Oh, the 8 weeks has kind of been a good in hindsight, especially around my fitness and my body and stuff like that. So, I don't think fitness should be an issue thanks to the trainers here for the last 8 weeks. I've just been running up and down the sideline, but it has been a little bit tough come game time.
The Chiefs meet the Rebels this Friday in Melbourne. India captain Virat Kohli has called on the ICC to look into the bails being used at the Cricket World Cup. Australian opener David Warner became the 5th player to be saved by them at the tournament during his side's defeat by India this morning. He edged a delivery onto his foot and the ball then hit the wickets without dislodging the bails. Kohli was left bemused.
You literally have to smash the stumps really hard, and I'm saying that as a batsman. I mean, if I see something happening like that, I'd be very surprised also. When you actually bowl a good ball and then you don't get the guy out, the ball hits the stump, and I haven't seen that happen so many times in the past.
India's next game is against New Zealand on Thursday night. Ferrari intend to appeal the time penalty that cost Sebastian Vettel victory in today's Canadian Grand Prix. Vettel was found to have rejoined the track in an unsafe manner, forcing Mercedes rival Lewis Hamilton to take evasive action. Hamilton crossed the line second but was declared the winner after the penalty was applied. That's the news. Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Mostly cloudy with isolated showers. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Taihape, Whanganui and Manawatu. Fine with high cloud, however a few showers in the west clearing overnight. For Waitomo, Taumaranui, Taupo, Taranaki. Also Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington. Mostly cloudy with isolated showers. Showers gradually increasing tomorrow. To Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with variable high cloud. A few showers developing in Nelson and inland Canterbury later tomorrow. Bulla through to Fiordland, mostly cloudy with isolated showers. Turning to rain tomorrow afternoon or evening with some heavy falls in Westland. Southland and Otago, long fine spells. Scattered rain in Southland and Clutha later tomorrow and a few spots elsewhere. Chatham Islands, cloudy at times with the odd shower. RNZ National, it's 8 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. New Zealand is calling time on its training mission in Iraq, but not until next year. There are currently up to 95 troops at Camp Taji training Iraqi security forces. New Zealand's deployment will end by June 2020. It's been working with Australia in the joint mission since 2015. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern extended the Iraq and Afghanistan deployments last September, but they were reduced in size. Defence Minister Ron Mark joins me now from Parliament. Good evening, Minister. Why now?
Good evening. Well, we said that we'd review the deployments in June, and we have done precisely that.
Why have you decided to leave?
Well, let's take Iraq. What we went into Iraq to do, at the request of the Iraqi government, was to train their personnel that they could play their part effectively in the Defeat ISIS campaign, and that they could recover control of their own country. During the time that we've been there, we have trained over 44,000 ISF personnel, and we are at the point now where we've had conversations with Australia, and we believe that we have done all we need to do. We're now transitioning into training the trainers, which gives autonomy autonomy and independence to Iraq themselves for the responsibility of training their own people. At this point, our job is done.
Yeah, so our job is done. But interestingly enough, Brigadier General Colin Keever, who was until May this year the commander of the Joint Task Force in Iraq, just this week he said that while ISIS may not hold any ground, they are absolutely still alive and well in the background, and they are expanding their influence and undermining the governments of Iraq and other nations. So are we tapping out before the job's actually really done?
Well, no, our job was not to be involved in combat operations. Our job was there to be a trainer and to train Iraqis that they might do that themselves. That said, it is one thing to defeat ISIS on the ground and to recover terrain that they had occupied in a conventional war. It is something quite different to defeat an ideology. So we're not blind to that, nor are any of the partnering nations in the Defeat ISIS coalition. It's just that we have moved into a new phase. Iraq is in a far better position to fight that campaign on the ground itself. Of course, it's going to continue to need assistance. It'll need assistance from the world and at large in reconstructing. One of the things that needs to be undertaken is a massive reconstruction job, which, if it is successful and if it's timely, will undermine ISIS's ability to create dissent or to live off of dissent.
So what's New Zealand's, sorry to interrupt, Minister, but what's New Zealand's role in this new phase then?
Well, in that new phase, we have made a commitment to increase our allocation of funding towards reconstruction. That is going up to $3 million a year. We are downsizing and exiting in June. From there, we have a commitment in Operation Gallant Phoenix, which we talked about today. That's an intelligence role, and I guess from there, it's going to be in the hands of NATO, who are going to take the lead on this.
So, how many people will remain working in intelligence then?
Well, we don't talk about exact numbers in terms of Operation Gallant Phoenix. As you know, that was not a publicised deployment because of the fact that it was set up on the back of us receiving information that a New Zealander had been kidnapped and been taken hostage.
But we remain present in an intelligence sense.
That's not an Iraq-based operation, but it is. It provides information for all of the Defeat ISIS coalition, and more broadly, as we found out on the 15th of March, when we had their horrendous attack in Christchurch, it became a very valuable source of quick information for our police back home.
So, was it the right decision then in 2015 to send troops to Iraq?
Well, it was the decision that was made by the government of the day, and as the government of today, it is our obligation to meet the commitments our government has made and the pledges that we've made to our people. I think if you look at where we are today, and I visited Iraq, and from where I sit on the back of having been to Iraq and been to Afghanistan, I received first-hand information. All of the advice I had from commanders on the ground is that our people had contributed to the training effectiveness of their personnel on the ground.
So do you believe it was a good decision then to be involved and to go there in 2015?
I believe we've met our commitment as made by the last government, and I believe it's been worthwhile.
So it was a good decision, worthwhile then?
Well, it's been worthwhile, and it's been valued, and all of our partners, and that includes NATO, whom we have an enhanced defence relationship with, have been very grateful for the work that we've done, but it is time for us to go.
We're almost out of time. In Afghanistan specifically, what will we be concentrating on there?
Well, we're downsizing the number of personnel that we've got at the Afghan National Academy for Training Officers from 11 down to 5, but we are seeking an appointment for 3 female instructors to train their women in peace and security and to enhance the female leadership element within the Afghan Defence Security Forces. Beyond that, there is an element in the NATO headquarters which enables us to have oversight over logistics and support to that training operation.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Defence Minister Ron Mark talking about our exit from Iraq, which will take place over about a year. Now, a midwife could face legal action after giving a woman in labour saline solution instead of pain relief against her wishes and then lying about it. But in the meantime, her identity is being kept secret despite the fact she is still working with pregnant women. In a report released today, the Health and Disability Commissioner slammed the midwife's actions. The pregnant woman had told her midwife she wanted the painkiller pethidine during the birth in 2018. But instead, the midwife gave the woman a saline solution, telling colleagues that she believed in the placebo effect. Health and Disability Commissioner Anthony Hill says those actions were deliberately deceptive.
I've said in the case that the midwife's actions were disgraceful, not a word that I use lightly. Essentially what happened was there was a plan for pain relief that involved pethidine at the point during labour where the pain was such that the client wished to have pethidine. The midwife said, I will give you that, and instead gave her a saline solution and injected that into the lure and told the client that in fact it was pethidine when it was not. So a very clear and absolute breach of the code.
So she lied to the woman in labour?
She actively deceived the patient. Yes, she did.
Apart from the breach of trust and the lying and the disregarding of the patient's wishes, is this illegal on the part of the midwife? Are these illegal actions?
Oh, it's an absolute breach of the code, which is law in New Zealand, and the price of that for this midwife is that I am referring her to the Director of Proceedings because it is one of the more serious breaches of the code, and the Director will consider whether to take effectively litigation in the Health Practitioners Disciplinary Tribunal, and if that is to occur, it is likely that there would be further conditions imposed should the tribunal uphold a breach of the practitioner's standards of practice in this case.
So disciplinary charges are still a possibility?
Absolutely.
I just want to go back to the woman in labour. So was she left there in a high degree of pain, having set out a labour plan where she asked for pain relief and had consented to pain relief? Was she essentially just left to suffer in distress during this?
That's correct. So the pain relief that she thought was being given, she saw being injected into the lure, she thought she was getting pain relief. She had an initial feeling of comfort, which very quickly faded, and she was commenting on the fact that she was in pain for the next period through that process. More saline was given. So again, we've got a situation where the midwife was simply actively deceiving her client, and it was completely unacceptable.
So what did she think she was doing here?
She would later say to the client that she was acting in the best interests of the baby, which was not the case here, and it was simply that she was preferring to do what she thought was best, and that is absolutely counter to informed consent, which is at the very heart of the code in New Zealand. It's at the very heart of the way we practice in clinical settings in New Zealand, and for that reason it is an unusual case, but it is a very serious one.
Well, there's a couple of things in that. First off, if she says she was acting in the best interests of the baby, I mean, whose interests take priority here? Because if the woman had specified and signed on to a birth protocol, don't her interests take priority?
In a situation like this, it is clear that the first patient is the mother. Clearly there is a second patient in the room, in the babe, but this was not a situation where there were complicated or competing interests, and always the mother is able and should be giving informed consent, because always the mother is the person to whom all this is happening as well. So there is a very clear situation here where there was no ambiguity as to what was going on, no ambiguity as to what was required, and a clear decision by the midwife to do what she thought best, which was simply inappropriate at every level.
Isn't it arrogant to assume that you know better than the patient?
It's really quite extraordinary in this day and age to have this kind of paternalistic attitude exhibited in this way. It's very unusual in the midwifery situation, which is, as I said earlier, built on an ethos which we see every day of a partnership between mother and midwife. This is an unusual case. It does go to the heart of that model, and it is for that reason being referred to the director. It's a very serious breach.
While it is an unusual case, I'm sure it will give a number of women pause for thought if they are pregnant currently. What is your advice to them in dealing with their midwives?
Always be open, ask the questions, and have a clear plan, except that sometimes plans are going to need to be amended on the day. But this is about being clear about what the plan is, being clear about expectations and communication. The decisions are for you as the mother. And so it's important that you have the information that you need to make the choices that you want to make about how this is going to go.
But sadly, that doesn't help you, does it, when you have someone who willfully deceives you and just does what they choose?
That's why this person is off to the director and then I suspect to the health practitioner's disciplinary tribunal. This is not behaviour that we will tolerate in the New Zealand environment at all.
So what's her status at the moment? Can she still operate as a midwife?
Yes, she is currently practising. She has taken some steps, which I'm not going to go into in any detail here. We have also referred her to the Midwifery Council and asked for a competency review. And in addition to that, it is very likely that litigation will be taken against her, but that is a matter now for the director.
Is it fair that, because we don't know her identity, that women could sign up to this midwife not knowing what has happened? You've already found in the way you have against her. I understand that there are still proceedings potentially open, but shouldn't people know who she is so that they can make an informed decision about whether they want her?
At this point, I am confident that the process is working appropriately. The midwife is on the radar actively with the Midwifery Council. That process is underway. I'm confident that the appropriate steps are being taken. If I was not, we would be doing something different, but I can personally assure you that the appropriate steps are in place around this person.
But she's an independent midwife, isn't she? So is there some supervision over her in every case that she's dealing with?
I'm not able to go into that detail, but what I can say is that the Midwifery Council process is underway. This person is in that process appropriately, and that will continue. So are you giving a personal guarantee here? I'm giving a guarantee that I'm confident that the process that is available is working. I'm confident that the Midwifery Council is looking at this appropriately, yes.
Have her clients been notified?
No.
Wow, doesn't that leave them in a difficult position? Well, actually, it doesn't, does it? Because they're oblivious.
I think it raises a good question about how this will track. I think it's likely that name suppression will be an issue in the tribunal and thereafter, and we have to be very careful about that now. But that's where the process that is in train in the law is working now, which is referral to the Midwifery Council for a competency review and the associated processes that sit around that. So this is not a space where there is no action. I can assure you of that. And that's the Health and Disability Commissioner, Anthony Hill there. It is 23 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let us know what you think about that. So that is a midwife who has had a case fined against her, yet her current clients aren't aware of the situation and her name is not being made public. What do you think? Is that the right way to do it? Also, let us know your thoughts on our troops being pulled out of Iraq over the next year. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Canterbury DHB says up to 15 people injured in the Mosque shootings will need to have ongoing surgery for years. It's been almost 3 months since the attacks in Christchurch, and so far nearly 120 people have been treated for their injuries. But as Logan Church reports, the ongoing surgeries are not only having a huge impact on the lives of the victims, but placing a huge strain on the hospital system itself.
Tamel Atatuju was shot 9 times at the El Noor Mosque on March 15th, making it impossible to walk or move easily. Whilst he's recovered from initial surgery, which enabled him to get out and about again, he's back at Bearwood Hospital.
This time this is for my left arm, to have which is the broken and missing piece of the bones on my bottom level lower level and the upper level. And they did harvested some bones from my left hips, and then they replace it. The bone cements, take it out and put the original bones to make long-term stronger.
But Tamel is only one of many requiring ongoing surgery. Standing outside the CDHB's outpatients building back in the central city, Chief of Surgery Greg Robertson explains.
Of the patients that we've had out in the community, there are quite a number of them that have had procedures done that were damage control procedures, so they ended up with a colostomy or injuries that need nerve reconstructions, those type of things, fractures that need metal eventually to be removed. So that group of patients will come back over the next 6 to 12 months, some a little earlier, some a little later in terms of when they'll be ready for their surgery.
And some of those people are going to have to keep coming back for years.
Well, we would estimate there's probably between 10 and 15 people who will require further surgical intervention over the years. Now, that assumes that all of the problems that we've corrected don't have any further issues with them. So people have had a laparotomy, a cut into the abdomen. Hernias can occur as a consequence of that type of surgery. So those sort of things may be longer down the line before they represent.
A huge number of hours have been put in by hundreds of CDHB staff following the attacks. Aside from the initial 48 patients who arrived at the emergency department on the day, the CDHB says another 70 patients arrived with minor injuries in the following weeks. Since the attacks, 88 operations have been performed. All victims combined have spent about 19,500 hours in hospital, plus about 3,000 hours in ICU. Greg Robertson says that has had a knock-on effect on those already waiting for surgeries.
We're now almost 3 months out after the event. There's one individual still in hospital, so it's not something that goes away quickly, and that's the bit that you don't estimate. And if you look at the broader service provisions for our population, because we had all that work to do for the Mosque's victims, we were unable to do all the surgery that we would routinely do. There was about 200 people who had their surgery deferred in that first week, another 150 the subsequent week, before we got back to sort of business as usual.
Mr. Robertson says staff are also having to take extra time off.
Our way of dealing with this was to try and reduce the demand of the hospital in that immediate week or two after the event. And some of the deferred surgery was really, we did the stuff we had to do, but anything that we thought was less urgent was deferred so that the patients could be cared for in the first instance, but also it gave some of the staff that had been working pretty continuously over the course of the weekend and the early part of that first week a chance to have a break to catch their breath and get back to where they should be.
The opening of a new hospital building in the coming year, which was supposed to open 2 years ago, is also expected to relieve some of the pressure on surgery staff. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Former Prime Minister Jim Bolger once famously declared, "Bugger the pollsters." And today those sentiments may be widely shared after two just-released political polls gave radically different results. The One News Colmar-Brunton poll was good news for the opposition, with National up 4 points to 44 and Labour down 6 percentage points to 42. But at exactly the same time, a News Hub Reid research poll had Labour able to govern alone on 50.8 and National slipping into the 30s on 37.4. Political reporter Yvette McCullough has the fallout.
It's the tale of two polls. One News Colmar-Brunton tells the story that the government didn't receive a budget boost and that Simon Bridges' leadership of National is likely safe for now, while News Hub Reid Research paints the picture of Labour soaring out of coalition and an axe hanging over Mr Bridges. Courier Market Research Principal David Farrer says it can't be a case of there being truth in both tales, and at least one is wrong.
The differences between the two polls are so great that they're outside what people call the margin of error, not just for one of the parties, but for three of the four parties. You just can't actually reconcile the two polls with each other.
The polls use different methodology, with One News using a mix of landline and cell phones, whereas News Hub's poll uses landlines and an internet panel. The One News poll was taken between June 4th and 8th, and News Hub's between May 29th and June 7th.
it could be that if there was a big slide in the government's fortunes after the budget, that would explain some of the difference. But to be honest, the difference is so great that I think a timing difference of 6 days, that's not credibly all of the answer.
Former Labour Party President Mike Williams says it's no wonder the public's faith in polls is shaken.
Certainly the credibility of polls must be falling away, and it must be damaging the whole industry. The problem is that it's getting very difficult to capture a representative sample of voters.
The reliability of polls has come under scrutiny following upsets like Brexit, the 2016 US election, and last month's Australian election, where polls had consistently predicted a Labour victory. Australian electoral analyst Dr Kevin Bonham says one issue seen in Australia was pollsters being reluctant to report outlier results.
Nobody wants to be the one poll who got it wrong while everybody else got it right, because that's a bit of a reputational disaster. And there have been a number of cases around the world of this sort of thing, often known as herding, happening, where all the polls near to the election are very similar to each other.
Dr Bonham says no one should put too much stock in one poll. UMR Research Executive Director Stephen Mills agrees and says polls need to come with big provisos.
It is now much harder to do political polling than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago. I think there's still nothing better. I mean, we can't go back to relying on pontificating editors or people talking to their taxi driver, but, they do need to be more cautiously treated.
As for the politicians, pollsters say they'll likely be looking to their own internal polls rather than these public polls for guidance on voter sentiment. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she relies on direct feedback.
My guide is always the feedback I get from the public, the messages that we hear. I take my guidance from them, and that has been fairly consistent, that actually they do have confidence in the government.
From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
Up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, upmarket homes in central Christchurch struggle to find buyers. Why is cash drying up in the small Bay of Plenty town of Murupara? And Australia's new tennis star. Do get in contact. We'd love to hear from you. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz about anything that you've heard on the show so far. And here's Susanna with the headlines.
The Prime Minister has announced that all New Zealand troops are to leave Iraq by June 2020. Up to 95 are currently in a joint mission with Australia, training Iraqi security forces at Camp Taji, north of Baghdad. Defence Minister Ron Mark has told Checkpoint the deployment has been worthwhile and is valued. Jacinda Ardern has confirmed it was after the Finance Minister put out a statement linking the National Party to claims of a Treasury hack that government ministers were advised by the spy agency, the GCSB, that it wasn't a hack. The agency's head, Andrew Hampton, called his minister Andrew Little in the hours after statements had gone out from both the Treasury and Grant Robertson. The insurance industry has told people who want lower premiums they have to have better buildings that can be more easily fixed after a disaster. Wellington's Mayor is setting up a task force on the insurance market following sharp rises in premiums. An insurance expert, Melissa Heath, says New Zealand is now the second riskiest country in the world, and its pricing insurance according to risk means it is now more realistic. The Pike River Recovery Agency says the re-entry team is making good progress and has re-established an important seal 170 metres inside the mine. The agency's Chief Operating Officer, Dingy Pattinson, says a lot of work remains before they can go beyond the seal, but there have been no major hitches. Experts on ventilation met last week to plan how they will manage the atmosphere in the mine during the next stage. A lawyer for two associates of Kim.com has criticised the District Court's handling of their extradition case. Mr. .com and his fellow defendants have gone to the Supreme Court, claiming the lower courts made errors in ruling they could be extradited to face copyright charges in the United States. Police officers at the scene of a fatal shooting in Mangere in May last year have told the High Court in Auckland of their attempts to find out what happened from a survivor. Abraham Tuuheava was shot dead and his wife Yolanda was severely injured. The Crown argues that Fisilau Tapaivalu and Me Sui Tufui were part of a trio who lured the couple to Greenwood Road to kill them. Those are our latest headlines, and our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Turning to business news now with Kim Savage. Kim, apparently ageist attitudes are putting people over the age of 45 kind of changing new careers, is it?
Yeah, putting a bit of fear into them, actually, some of these attitudes they're encountering with prospective employers. So, of course, we're living longer these days. We're talking about a life expectancy of 86 for men and 89 for women. And, of course, that means we're generally working longer as well. And this has actually led to Wise Ones. This is a specialist recruitment company. Kate Ross, she's the founder of that company, to speak out about this. She's saying that this is becoming increasingly an issue with people. For example, a client who she's placed with businesses many times over, and now coming to her in their, say, 50s and finding that they're actually really worried about what they're going to do in terms of changing jobs and whether they're going to find themselves still relevant in the workforce. So what Kate Ross is saying is backed up by Stats New Zealand figures, which show around 140,000 people over the age of 45 are being underutilised. And when you do the maths, essentially, it works out that that's about just over $2 billion that those people are then not spending in the economy. So she's arguing that businesses and the wider economy are actually missing out by these people over the age of 45 not being employed and not being utilised to the best of their abilities. And she says that it's essentially down to employers possibly thinking that people who have more experience are going to cost more. And she says that's not necessarily the case, because quite often they're actually just wanting to use their skills, and more importantly, as they creep closer in those last sort of couple of decades towards retirement, wanting to save money, because the figures show that there's around it costs around $1,000 a week to fund that retirement. And of course, if you're living longer, you're needing to pay that money for longer, and maybe about 600 of that is made up of payments from superannuation. So it's a significant amount of money people need to save, and Kate Ross from Wise One says that it really benefits everyone all round if those ageist attitudes could change.
Hey, I'm particularly interested in this next story because we've been talking on the program about Murupara losing its cash machine, its only cash machine. I see here BNZ has said it's going to keep its regional branches open a little longer, but no such commitment from any of the other major banks.
Yes, well, BNZ has said that it's going to just keep these closures on hold for now. All of the major banks, as we know, we have been talking about it for a few years now, haven't they? They've been gradually closing those branches as more and more people move to using online services. Basically, you can do pretty much everything online now. But what BNZ's saying is that they are finding that customers, there are still some things they want to walk into a branch and speak to people about face-to-face, things like KiwiSaver and mortgages. So obviously a mortgage is a big deal for people. It's the largest debt people will generally have in their lifetime. And so they're really wanting to sit down and be face-to-face with people. So that's the commitment that BNZ has made, to keep any closures on hold through till 2020. So we went to the other banks and had a bit of a chat with them about what their plans are. And ANZ, we know, has already closed several branches. It's closed Riverton and Southland, and also Stratford and Taranaki. And then last year closed 12 branches throughout the country. So it says that it will continue to review that. It currently has 70 regional branches, so I'll just be keeping an eye on that. Westpac and ASB, two of the other Australian-owned banks, they are yet to say what they're going to do with all their branches in the region. And Kiwibank, as we know too, has been gradually uncoupling its Kiwibank services with New Zealand Post. And so some of those branches have closed or moved to kind of separate services there. But as far as BNZ goes, you'd have to say it's a pretty good PR move on their part for their regional customers, sort of offering to keep those branches open a lot longer.
Hey, shall we have a quick gallop around the markets? What else was going on today?
Yes, let's just take a quick look at the NZX Top 50. Closed just down around 20 points this evening. That's about 0.2% lower. Finishes the day at 10,028 points. And taking a quick look at the currency, New Zealand dollar buying 66.3 US cents and 95.1 Australian.
Thanks, Kim. That's Kim Savage joining us with business news from our Wellington studio. A peaceful mass protest in Hong Kong over an extradition bill descended into violence as several hundred protesters clashed with police outside the city's parliament. Hundreds of thousands of people had jammed Hong Kong's streets earlier to protest against the bill in the biggest demonstration in years. Many fear it will put the city's legal independence at risk. Zachary Goldman reports.
Protesters clashed with police in Hong Kong in the early hours of Monday as several hundred demonstrators tried to force their way into the city's parliament. Images show police waving batons and deploying a water cannon. The scuffles came hours after hundreds of thousands of protesters had marched peacefully through the city to protest against a new potential law which would allow Beijing to extradite Hong Kong suspects to mainland China for trial.
No China extradition! No China extradition!
And that in turn raised fears among activists about China's grip on the semi-autonomous island. The demonstrations were the biggest against the Chinese government in at least 15 years. Reuters correspondent James Pomfret spent the day in the streets.
People here aren't just your hardcore protesters. You have ordinary citizens. You have fathers, mothers, kids, and they don't feel comfortable if the law is enacted because it will allow China, in effect, to impose or part of its legal system to encroach into Hong Kong for the first time ever. And this march could be a turning point in finally persuading the authorities to either postpone or scrap it.
The bill will be debated on Wednesday and could come into effect at the end of this month. Hong Kong's leader, Carrie Lam, has tweaked the proposal but refused to scrap the bill, prompting calls for her resignation.
I think it's such an overwhelmingly large number of people that it will be very difficult for Hong Kong's leader Carrie Lam and the Beijing communist leaders to ignore this.
Senior judges in Hong Kong have expressed their concern over a lack of trust in Chinese courts, and human rights groups are worried about the use of torture and the lack of judicial rights on the mainland.
And that was Zachary Goldman reporting. Residents of a small Bay of Plenty town are fighting to keep cash flowing in and out of their only bank. The New Zealand Credit Union in Murupara hasn't handled cash since the town's single ATM was ripped from its wall by thieves last week. Now residents are concerned it'll never handle cash again. Katie Scotcher reports.
40 years ago, the forestry town of Murupara was thriving. But its economy collapsed when the large forestry companies began contracting jobs out. Bob Warren, who works at the town's pharmacy, says Murupara used to be a beautiful place, but now it's riddled with crime, and the town's shops are often the target.
Well, the town used to be a beautiful town, but when they went contracting, this town really fell apart. Yeah, and there's not a lot of shops here. We have quite a few burglaries in the shops that are open.
Last Monday, thieves used a log loader to rip the town's only ATM out of the wall of the credit union building. The machine was found intact later that day, 8 kilometres away, and the police believe it fell from the trailer carrying it. Marina Teddy, who owns one of the town's only takeaway shops, says the town has been without a fully functioning bank and cash flow since.
It's a big loss to our community, especially for our old people who some of them can't even travel into Rotorua, even though we have buses running from here. And businesses, all bushmen, everybody, we're going to suffer big time.
Marina uses credit union to bank her business profits, so she's forced to drive to the next closest bank, 45 minutes away in Rotorua. But not everyone is able to travel that far, so they ask for cash withdrawals at their local shops.
Sometimes we've got it, sometimes we haven't, because everybody's paying by EFTPOS, so we can't actually help them out sometimes, and we have to turn them away, which is sad.
Bob Warren says they've had people coming to the pharmacy for cash since the robbery too.
We only hold $200 in, that's our float, and we can't give them any at all.
The community will meet tonight with credit union representatives to discuss the issues. Marina Teddy says Murupara will fight to keep cash in the town.
Fight to keep our bank open for one. There's people there that are going to lose their jobs because if the bank closes down, and then that's another business gone from Murupara.
Murupara Community Board member Mangere says residents need to decide what the future of banking in Murupara looks like.
We really want the community to come up with some cool suggestions, cool ideas about how we can help ourselves.
In a statement, New Zealand Credit Union says following the recent robbery and a previous attack on a different ATM at the same branch, the decision to stop handling cash was made for staff safety. It says it understands the demand for an ATM and banking services, and it wants to hear from the community on how they or others can assist in protecting retailers. New Zealand Credit Union says it cannot confirm if cash will be handled at the branch in future. Moti hotaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Katie Scott Churaho.
It is an ambitious goal to have 20,000 people living in central Christchurch by 2024. And a key plank of that is the first batch of 940 flats and townhouses being built by Fletcher Living in the central city. But after close to 6 months on the market, the first of the upmarket townhouses, priced at between $1 and $1.6 million, are struggling to sell. Conan Young and visual journalist Simon Rogers take a look at whether the former National Government's bold vision runs the risk of turning into a grand folly.
RNZ was keen to take a look inside the mostly unsold Latimer Terraces apartments on the eastern edge of Christchurch's CBD, but was told by Fletcher Living's Steve Evans that they were not available to view.
Well, unfortunately, we've got people going through them, so it's not necessarily the right time to go through that. Equally, what we'd encourage people to do...
It's not that you didn't want us to focus.
Of course not. What we're talking about is different products. What we'd encourage your viewers to do and everyone to do is to come down and have a look.
RNZ understands that after being on the market for close to 6 months, just 3 of the 20 upmarket townhouses have sold. However, Steve Evans would not be drawn on exact numbers.
I won't go into the commercial details of what we've sold. If you'd like to come and buy one, come and see us, is the best way of saying it. We're finding there is a good appetite for some of that product. But interesting enough, from a product point of view, from a home type point of view, that suits a part of the market.
It's a bit more expensive, isn't it?
Look, it's a different part of the market.
Yeah. One home Mr Evans was keen to show RNZ around was a 3-bedroom townhouse at another Fletcher Living development down the road, known as the Bedford Terraces. This one had an offer made on it a month after it went on the market. Price tag $780,000.
Appliances, a good layout for a 2, 3, 4 person terrace house. It's got a small backyard area, but the reality is you don't need, in inner city living, you don't need lots of your own private space because you've got such great public spaces right out your front door.
And so this place here looks straight onto Rowwater Park, and
correct.
You're sort of straight in. It's quite surreal, really, isn't it? Being in a terrace home, but looking straight into the city there.
And that's the way that city living is meant to be. I mean, if you look at great cities around the world, the way in which the residential responds to the feeling of the city is important. You need to be able to have private space, but you recognise that you're in amongst a city which has a lot of public space and a lot of interactive space, and so that's what you want. When you get upstairs into the bedrooms that we've got upstairs, you've got your privacy, you've got your non-overlooking areas, which is important as well, because people want privacy, but yet they want to be part of the city. That's why they're moving back in here.
Initial sales of the handful of already completed Fletcher Living homes may be slow, but that hasn't put the company off forging ahead with building further terrace houses and apartments. Under an agreement with the government, which is selling it lots of land at commercial rates, the company has 44 apartments and 50 terrace homes under construction in the development RNZ was shown, and another 58 being built as part of another project just a block away. Most developers need to secure a certain number of pre-sales before a bank is willing to lend them money, but not Fletcher Living.
And we're almost unique in that position because we don't need to worry about getting pre-sales to start development. We're backed by Fletcher Building, we own by Fletcher Building, and therefore have the balance sheet to be able to deliver.
Most homes are aimed at the lower to middle part of the market. Apartments range in price from $375,000 for a 1-bedroom flat to $650,000 for a larger one with 2 bedrooms. Steve Evans says it's a case of build it and they will come.
We've always thought that it's going to take time. It takes time for people to understand what city living is about. I mean, we've invested over $1 million to bring in temporary uses into One Central, to bring people back into the city. We feel that's our obligation as good corporate citizens, as good community builders, to look at how do we get people here.
And he's optimistic about the target to get 20,000 people living in the city's CBD by 2024.
I wouldn't say so much it's ambitious, it's visionary. And you don't get to affect change. You don't get to create communities unless you think wider than just the physical nature of a house. So we've spent a lot of time looking at how we do that. We've got a great partner in Otakaro. We've got great dealings with Christchurch City Council. And all of those partners are all focused on a singular goal, which is bringing life back into the city. We'll do our part on the residential side. Hopefully we'll get some more stadiums. Hopefully get more development going on in terms of Christchurch. And when we all come back here in 6 years' time, we'll be saying, gee, was it only 20,000 we were trying to get? Because it could be more.
Steve Evans' positive outlook is not shared by the Property Council, which commissioned research last year that found the 2024 target was unrealistic, noting that even central Wellington had less than 20,000 people living there. Christchurch real estate agent Tony Brazier says he's not surprised that apartments at the $1 to $1.5 million price range are taking a while to shift in this part of the city.
There's plenty of townhouses and apartments on the western side of the inner city at that sort of level, but the eastern side has never been proven at that level. People will see that kind of value eventually, but right from the start might be a bit difficult.
Mr Brazier says while the pace at which new CBD restaurants and bars are being built has picked up, there still needs to be more to make it a really attractive place to live.
Well, you've got to ask yourself, why would they be there? They don't all want to be there just for work. If they are, then they want to be able to walk to entertainment, all sorts of things in the inner city that they might have been used to if they lived in London or somewhere like that.
All three of the housing projects that make up Phase 1 of Fletcher Living's East Frame development are now either completed or under construction. It's hoped construction will start on Phase 2 by the start of next year. All eyes will now be on this ambitious development to see if it can deliver on its promise of bringing people back into the heart of Christchurch. Kei o te tahi ahau, mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Konanyang tēnei.
Do let us know your thoughts on that one, whether you'd be happy to live in central Christchurch and would you pay up to $1.6 million for the privilege. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 9 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And a lawyer for two associates of the internet entrepreneur Kim.com has told the Supreme Court the offences his clients are facing in the United States do not qualify for extradition. Mr. .com and his fellow defendants, Matthias Ortman, Bram van der Kolk and Finn Bartoto, says the Court of Appeal has made several errors in ruling they should be extradited to face copyright charges in the US. Anne-Marie May has been at today's hearing in the Supreme Court.
Grant Illingworth, who is representing Matthias Ortman and Bram van der Kolk, told the court the offences his clients are charged with in the US do not equate to any criminal offence in New Zealand. He said legally, if their conduct is not criminal in New Zealand, the Extradition Act requirements cannot be satisfied. Mr. Illingworth said to justify committal of an offence in New Zealand, there would have to be appropriate evidence relating to matters such as ownership and infringement of copyright. But the US had not produced any evidence to allow those issues to be considered properly under its law or New Zealand law. He said the District Court had made serious errors in its handling of the case, and the High Court and Court of Appeal should never have upheld its decision.
The District Court judge misunderstood, misstated and misapplied the law at every stage of the analysis. His Honour's judgment, we submit, was the antithesis of a meaningful judicial assessment and constituted a serious miscarriage of justice.
Mr. Illingworth said invalid exercises of statutory power, which he says occurred in the District Court in this case, compelled the intervention of the higher courts, which have supervisory powers over the lower courts. He said the District Court judge did not do his own assessment of the paperwork presented by the US. He just used the material contained in the US record of the case.
We say that was an egregious error. A really serious problem arose because His Honour thought that he had to take the whole record of case at face value. And I'll demonstrate that His Honour cut and pasted 150 pages of his judgment straight from the US submissions and simply took it at face value.
Grant Illingworth said infringement of copyright was at the heart of every one of the charges his clients face, and the lower courts haven't looked at that issue properly. He said Kim.com's company Mega Upload allowed its users to upload files and share them with others, and it was those people who were infringing copyright. He used a photocopier as an analogy.
They are providing the photocopier. Someone else comes along and uses the photocopier. They are not saying, please use our photocopier for illegal purposes. You're not taking a document, you're not obtaining a document, you're not using a document.
Mr Illingworth said Mega Upload also provided a tool whereby people who said they owned the copyright in a certain property could get onto the site and remove links they said were unlawful. The Supreme Court hearing is expected to run all week. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
Temper tantrums, racket throwing and referee abuse have become recent hallmarks of Australian tennis, thanks to the likes of Nick Kyrgios and Bernard Tomic. But Australia has a new tennis star and she's winning praise and respect around the world. 23-year-old Ashleigh Barty won the French Open at the weekend, the first Australian and Indigenous Australian to claim the women's singles title in almost half a century. The ABC's Rachel Mealy has more.
As the umpire announced the result, Ashleigh Barty raised her arms above her head and thanked the crowd. Her victory at the French Open caps off a remarkable journey for the 23-year-old Queenslander.
I've been able to play really good tennis when I've needed it, and this is just incredible. I never dreamt that I'd be sitting here with this trophy here at the French Open. And I mean, obviously we have dreams and and goals as children, but this is incredible.
Mark Handley is the CEO of Tennis Queensland. He's told ABC Radio Brisbane that Ash Barty's potential knows no bounds.
How good was it, not only for Queensland tennis, but Australian tennis in general? So she's a star. Once she came back onto the circuit in the last 18 months, you can just see this gradual increase in capability and resolve.
Her childhood coach, Jim Joyce, says he saw Barty's potential early on.
The thing that stood out with her was her hand-eye coordination was amazing, but it was her focus and her concentration for that age.
Former Australian champion Rod Laver told SBS he was thrilled to be on the sideline for her victory.
Yeah, no, it was great to see Ashleigh play as well as she did. She overpowered the lady that she was competing against. I think she felt like, I've got this match.
The weekend's win comes only 3 years since Ashleigh Barty quit tennis and took up professional cricket. Delissa Cummins was Ashleigh Barty's teammate on the Brisbane Heat team. She told ABC Radio in Brisbane that her sportsmanship stands out.
There's a lot of people out there that are keeping their eye on her, and I think they were just really proud of who she is and the way she carries herself.
She says Barty's break from tennis helped her to find her love for the game again.
Well, I don't think she'd be coming back to cricket. And I don't think she needs to be honest, the way she's going in tennis. And it's great to see she's got that enjoyment back.
Christopher Clary is the New York Times tennis correspondent. He told RN Breakfast Ash Barty's talent has been apparent for a long time.
We did a survey last year for the New York Times of the best shots in tennis, in women's tennis. We asked a bunch of coaches and players to respond, and Ash was out of the top 10 at that point. And she was number 1 or number 2 in a lot of categories. All of her peers and people who watched her for a living knew how talented that she was. So I think it's really been an upgrade in her mental game and her mental approach and her self-belief and her ability to focus. That's made the difference for her this year because the game's been there for a while.
He says Ash Barty's lower body strength, her powerful forehand and her slice backhand could see her cement her position as one of the greats of women's tennis and could see her continue her success at Wimbledon in a few weeks' time.
Rachel Mealy reporting on Australia's new tennis star, 23-year-old Ashleigh Barty. Time for some of your feedback before the news on our earlier story about a midwife who's been reprimanded by the Health and Disability Commissioner for disgraceful and dishonest conduct. This is over giving her pregnant client saline rather than pain relief and then lying to her. Jeanette says, I am incredulous and beyond furious that the midwife's current clients have not been informed so they as adults can make an informed decision about their care. I challenge any male in particular to suggest this is in any way appropriate. Anne says, I'm not actually surprised at this midwife's behaviour, nor do I find it unusual. My experience of independent midwives as a mother was that, ironically, paternalism and puritanism is rife. I would never recommend an independent midwife. That's from Anne. And someone else has emailed in to say, I don't think the issue with the midwife overriding a patient's wishes is necessarily unusual. When I was pregnant, the midwife who ran our antenatal class told us a story about a patient of hers who had requested an epidural. She told us she thought the woman didn't need an epidural, and so she delayed giving it to her until it was too late, and her client gave birth without it. I was shocked at the time, not only that she completely disregarded her client's wishes, but also that it was something the midwife was proud of and was happy to share with the class. And on those townhouses in Christchurch that are a bit slow to sell at 1.6 million, this person says, pity the public doesn't agree with Fletcher's.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Lei a tāua tēnei. The government has announced it will begin pulling New Zealand troops from Iraq before ending the deployment altogether by next June. Up to 95 troops are currently training Iraqi security forces in a joint mission with Australia at Camp Taji. The number will be reduced to a maximum of 75 next month and 45 from January. The Prime Minister extended the Iraq and Afghanistan deployments last September, but they were reduced in size. Jacinda Ardern says significant progress has been made at Taji, helping Iraqi forces to prevent the resurgence of Islamic State. The Defence Minister says the mission has been worthwhile and valued, but now it's time to go. Ron Mark told Checkpoint's Lisa Owen that since 2015, New Zealand has trained more than 44,000 Iraqi troops.
We believe that we have done all we need to do. We're now transitioning into training the trainers, which gives autonomy and independence to Iraq themselves for the responsibility of training their own people. At this point, our job is done.
Ron Mark. New Zealand's Afghanistan deployment is to be reduced slightly and its focus changed to involving women in peace and security initiatives. Speaking to reporters this afternoon, the Prime Minister also made it clear it was after the Finance Minister put out a statement linking the National Party to claims of a Treasury hack that government ministers were advised by the GCSB it wasn't a hack. She says the Minister in charge of the GCSB, Andrew Little, got a call from its head, Andrew Hampton, in the hours after statements had gone out from both Treasury and Grant Robertson. Here's our political reporter Joe Moyer.
Up until Jacinda Ardern's media conference this afternoon, ministers had refused to say whether the GCSB advice had come before or after Mr Robertson's statement. Ms Ardern says initially it was a dispute over language, and it wasn't until later the next day that the government found out a hack hadn't happened. The State Services Commission is investigating Treasury's involvement in the hack claims, but the National Party says a broader investigation is needed. From Parliament, Joe Moyer.
The Canterbury District Health Board says up to 15 people injured in the Mosque massacre will need ongoing surgery for years. Nearly 120 people have been treated for their injuries they suffered in the shootings. Figures released to Checkpoint by the DHB revealed that 88 operations have been performed. The board's chief of surgery is Greg Robertson.
Well, we would estimate there's probably between 10 and 15 people who will require further surgical intervention over the years. Now, that assumes that all of the problems that we've corrected don't have any further issues with them. So people have had a laparotomy, a cut into the abdomen. Hernias can occur as a consequence of that type of surgery. So those sort of things may be longer down the line before they represent.
The Canterbury DHB's Chief of Surgery, Greg Robertson. The Health and Disability Commissioner says the conduct of a midwife who gave a woman saline solution rather than a painkiller during labour is was disgraceful. Anthony Hill said that by disregarding the patient's wishes and lying to her, the midwife's actions amounted to a serious breach of the code. The woman had told the midwife she wanted Etonix gas and pethidine, but when she asked for the painkiller during labour, the midwife told a student and another midwife at the hospital that she would instead give her saline solution as a placebo. Mr Hill says the midwife later claimed she was acting in the best interests of the baby, which was not the case.
Was simply that she was preferring to do what she thought was best, and that is absolutely counter to informed consent, which is at the very heart of the code in New Zealand. It's at the very heart of the way we practice in clinical settings.
Anthony Hill has not named the midwife, who is still practising. A lawyer for two associates of kin.com has criticised the District Court's handling of their extradition case. Mr. .com and his fellow defendants have gone to the Supreme Court, claiming the lower courts made several errors in ruling they could be extradited to face copyright charges in the US. Grant Illingworth for Matthias Ortmann and Bram van der Kolk today questioned the evidence the US had produced and also submitted that the District Court judge, who first considered the case, did not do his own assessment of the paperwork presented by the US.
We say that was an egregious error. A really serious problem arose because His Honour thought that he had to take the whole record of case at face value. And I'll demonstrate that His Honour cut and pasted 150 pages of his judgment straight from the US submissions and simply took it at face value.
Lawyer Grant Illingworth. Air 2 says it's extremely worried that there have now been 4 serious assaults this year on hospital guards working for the same company, Allied Security. The union says the latest guard to be attacked was working in Christchurch Hospital's emergency department on Queen's birthday weekend. The other assaults were at Waikato Hospital and Hill Morton and Christchurch hospitals, where 2 guards are still off work as a result. An Air 2 spokesperson, Matt Danaher, says the union has raised problems over safety with Allied Security before.
It's got to be managed properly, managed in a way that leaves the staff and the patients and visitors and so on feeling safe and feeling like, if there's one place you think should be a safe space, it's a hospital.
Allied Security has declined to comment. It's 6:05. The veteran New Zealand footballer Abby Erceg says the football Ferns are in a good place mentally and physically heading into the FIFA Women's World Cup. The Ferns open their campaign against European champions the Netherlands on Wednesday morning. This will be the 4th World Cup for Erceg, who retired twice before returning earlier this year following the review into the organisation and previous coach Andreas Heraf. She says the setup is a lot more settled under new coach Tom Simani.
I think less stress off the field will automatically relate to less stress on the field. I think playing at this level is stressful enough. We don't need to add anything off the field, bring that into the game. So if players can go in with a clear mindset, I think it'll help.
Abby Erceg. Defender Michaela Moore has been ruled out of the tournament after rupturing her Achilles tendon in training and will be replaced by Nicole Stratford. All Blacks lock Brodie Retallick will make his Super Rugby return for the Chiefs' do-or-die clash against the Melbourne Rebels this weekend. He's been out of Super Rugby for 8 weeks, recovering from a wrist injury. And the Gold Coast Titans lock Keegan Hipgrave is set to miss Friday's clash with the New Zealand Warriors after being charged by the National Rugby League judiciary over a Grade 1 shoulder charge. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Otago Medical School's Dr. John Cornwall wants to talk about the ethics of euthanasia. Because once you opt out of life, you can't opt back in again. We have a window on the world of football in Turkey, where politics is never far away, and Peter Lamp is back in Palmerston North, having spent the past month sampling sport across the Tasman. It's all on Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Waikato, including Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty. Mostly cloudy with isolated showers. Gisborne to Wairarapa, also Taihape, Whanganui and Manawatu. Fine with high cloud, however, a few showers in the west, clearing overnight. Waitomo, Taumaranui, Taupo, Taranaki, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast and Wellington. Mostly cloudy with isolated showers, showers gradually increasing tomorrow. For Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine with variable high cloud, a few showers developing in Nelson and inland Canterbury later tomorrow. Bulla through to Fiordland, mostly cloudy with isolated showers turning to rain tomorrow afternoon or evening, with some heavy falls in Westland. Southland and Otago, long fine spells. Scattered rain in Southland and Clutha later tomorrow and a few spots elsewhere. Chatham Islands, cloudy at times with the odd shower. It's coming up to 6:08.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. New Zealand will end its training mission in Iraq, but not until next year. There are currently up to 95 troops at Camp Taji training Iraqi security forces. New Zealand's deployment will end by June 2020. It's been working with Australia in the joint mission since 2015. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern extended the Iraq and Afghanistan deployments last September, but they were reduced in size. She says the Iraq deployment will continue to get smaller before winding up altogether.
Significant progress has been made at Taji, with the Iraqi security forces having increased their capability to defeat and prevent the resurgence of ISIS. Those forces will now take on a greater role in the delivery of basic training, and the focus of New Zealand and Australian personnel can shift to training Iraqi trainers.
Jacinda Ardern was asked why it's taking so long to end the deployment altogether, given Labor had opposed it before coming into government.
But we did also, though, in coming into office, have to acknowledge that we had a commitment that had been made. Not only a commitment that had been made to the Iraqi government, but also a commitment in conjunction with Australia to work together to offer this training mission. This was about honouring that commitment, completing the job that we said we'd do, and now that the time is right, ultimately leaving.
Our political editor, Jane Patterson, was there when the Prime Minister made her announcement. Hi, Jane. What do you make of the timing?
Well, I think Labor or the coalition government has really gone for a bit of a compromise position here. Of course, you have the Defence Minister, Ron Mark, who is New Zealand First, from the New Zealand First Party, and then the confidence and supply partner of Labor, the Greens. Now, back in May last month, when I talked to Ron Mark, he said that, you know, the fight against ISIS had not been successful. It hadn't finished yet, that there was still work on the ground to be done. And this decision, I think, reflects the fact that New Zealand wants to stay for a bit longer and be seen to be still part of that coalition with the US and Australia in particular. But the compromise part is that there'll be a gradual reduction ending. There will be a final end point that we didn't have last September when the coalition government extended it for a second time, New Zealand's second extension. But also money will be spent on stabilisation in Iraq, and really that will help ease the Greens' concerns, because that is money that will be going into rebuilding and not such combat-specific funding. So I think a compromise has been reached that will keep both of these parties happy.
Thanks, Jane. That's our political editor, Jane Patterson, joining us from Parliament there. It is 11 minutes after 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The writing could be on the wall for Fuller's special status ferry services to Waiheke and Devonport, but change for unhappy passengers may still be some way off. Waiheke residents are getting increasingly frustrated at what they say are lengthy delays and cancelled sailings on the ferry, which are their only transport to the mainland. The Mayor of Auckland is backing calls by Auckland Transport for the Minister of Transport to bring the services under AT's oversight. But even if that happens, one transport commentator warns it will take some time to negotiate. Joanna McKenzie reports.
Phil Goff and Auckland Transport both want the Minister of Transport to revoke the special status of the Waiheke and Devonport ferry services. The routes, which are operated by Fuller's, are the only parts of the city's public transport network that sit outside AT's oversight. Passengers of both routes have been complaining to the company for months about cancellations and delays. AT says it knows there are problems but can't do anything because it has no jurisdiction over the services. It wants that to change and has asked the Minister to bring the routes under AT's wings. Phil Goff agrees and says in particular the Waiheke ferry is critical to residents and needs to be regulated.
This is a service that is a lifeline to the island. They don't have alternative transport modes. If this service fails, then that dramatically affects the life of those people on the island that rely on those services to go to school, to go to work, to do medical appointments, statements and so on.
Mr Goff says the decision to make the services exempt was made under the former Transport Minister, Stephen Joyce.
He did so, I think, after being lobbied by Fuller's, and he did so, according to Auckland Transport, at very late notice. That late change made to the Act was against the submission and concerns expressed by Auckland Transport at the time.
Mr Goff says Fuller's is open to discussing the exempt status of its routes, and if that doesn't happen quickly, there are other options.
If they don't, that can in any case be overridden by the Minister, and we would like to see that happen if it's required sooner rather than later, and not waiting till the full review of the public transport operating model.
But transport commentator Matt Lowry from the website Greater Auckland says while revoking the exempt status would be great, it won't be a quick fix.
Once the ministry have gone through and done their consultation and done all their reviews, and that's probably going to take quite some time, I assume, and then Auckland Transport will have to tender out those services. That will take time, and then it will take time to get that implemented.
Mr Lowry says, on the plus side, if the tender process takes a while, by the time any new vessels are bought, they'll be much more technically advanced and environmentally friendly.
One of the good things, I guess, about the delays is that there's more chance that when it does finally happen, it means that the new ferries that we will likely need to get will be electrically powered and all those sorts of things, which will be a bonus as well.
In a statement, the Transport Minister, Mr Twyford, says he's received a letter from Auckland Transport stating its belief that the services should not be exempt from regulation. He says the ministry is now preparing advice on the process to consult affected parties and how any potential changes could be made. Fuller's has been approached for comment. In Auckland, called Joanna Mackenzie-Aho.
And since Joanna put that story together, Fuller's has sent this response. Its chief, Mike Horn, says he welcomes the review of the public transport operating model. He says a key area impeding ferry services between Waiheke and Auckland is wharf and ferry infrastructure. And Auckland Council and Auckland Transport, as owners of that infrastructure, need to lead the way on resolving those issues. 2 dams, a lime juicing plant and a Māori tourism venture are among 19 projects in Hawke's Bay that will receive nearly $70 million in cash from the Provincial Growth Fund. Most of the money will be spent on developing much-needed water infrastructure, upgrading transport links and investing in programs that get more people into work. Here's our Hawke's Bay reporter, Anusha Bradley, with the details.
Students at Central Hawke's Bay College welcomed local and central government politicians onto Pukekaiho Pa to celebrate $68 million worth of spending in the region. $120,000 will be spent on developing the Pa and 5 others that surround Waipukoro into tourist attractions. But the bulk of the $68 million will go on water and infrastructure projects, including 2 water storage schemes, albeit on a much smaller scale than the controversial and now scrapped Ruataniwha Dam. Central Hawke's Bay Mayor Alex Walker says the district's future growth will depend on these new dams.
Number one priority for us is about that security of access to water. As I said before, we have businesses that are currently at risk, as well as the fact that we can't encourage new development without having access to water.
Most of the water in Hawke's Bay is already allocated, much of it going to big dairy farms. The Under-Secretary for Regional Economic Development, the New Zealand First MP, Fletcher Tabuto, says Cabinet can't continue to invest in water storage to put more dairy on the ground.
This is about what the locals want though, and the locals want more horticulture. They want to grow more fruit. They want to do that, and we have to help them.
The MP for Ikaroa Rāwhiti, Meka Whaitiri, says water security is also vital for Māori development.
So the Heretaunga Plains was actually once upon a time a swamp. So it was underwater, and so it's interesting how we're doing like a 360. Now we're going into water security, but I'm really proud of the Coalition's government commitment and investment in water storage. It was something that our opposition said we weren't into, but we've just demonstrated with Fletcher being here today our commitment to explore progressive, innovative water storage solutions.
Wairoa will get nearly $10 million in funding to upgrade roads, develop Māori land and for programs to get more young people into work. This includes a $355,000 loan to a Wairoa lime juicing company, the Limery, to expand its production plant with the hope of providing more jobs and training to locals. Owner Diane Downey says they couldn't do it without the government's help.
And so going to the Provincial Growth Fund and placing our story and the fact that we're actually also working very heavily with the college and using the facility as a hands-on learning ground.
Fletcher Tabuteau says the $68 million for Hawke's Bay is just a start, and he anticipates further industry-led announcements in the coming months. In Waipukuro for Checkpoint, Anusha Bradley.
A construction crane has collapsed onto an apartment house in the US city of Dallas, slicing through 5 floors of the building, killing at least 1 person and injuring 6. The collapse occurred just before 2 p.m. local time as a bout of severe weather blew through the city. A nearby resident told CNN that she saw the crane come down on the apartment building in downtown Dallas just as extremely high winds kicked up in the area. She says the crane just sliced through the building like a hot knife through butter. The building's parking garage was also heavily damaged, and authorities planned a thorough search for anyone else who may have been trapped or killed inside. 1 person was found dead in a residential portion of the 5-storey building. 6 others were taken to hospital, 2 of them in critical condition. Police officers called to a shooting in Mangere last year have described the bloody scene and their attempts to find out what happened from the sole survivor. Fisilau Tapai Valu and Mesui Tufui are on trial in the High Court in Auckland, accused of murdering a man and trying to murder his wife. Both deny the charges, while a third man pleaded guilty last week. Our court reporter Annika Smith filed this report.
It was pitch black when Brian Cope drove down Greenwood Road with his son at about 5:45 in the morning of the 1st of May last year. About halfway down the rural stretch of road, he noticed something lying off to the side. It looked like a body.
I sort of drove past slowly. I did say to my son that that looked like somebody on the side of the road. We didn't stop. I was a little bit scared as to what I'd see or find. So we carried on to Ascot Ave, and then I stopped in the first driveway, one of the businesses there, called the 111.
Constables Kasaya Tomupilu and Damien Karahi were dispatched to the scene. Ms Tomupilu told the court they both ran towards the body with a first aid kit.
I shone the torch on the victim's face and she woke up. She had a wound on her forehead and her face was covered in blood.
The constable told Crown Prosecutor Gareth Kays the woman said her name was Yolanda.
I asked her what happened and she told me she had been shot in the head.
Did she say how many times she'd been shot?
She told me she'd been shot 4 times.
Constable Tomu Pilo said there was a second body lying about 10 metres away. It was Yolanda's husband, Abraham Tu'iava.
The husband laid flat on his face. We tried to pull him around, but then his hand was blue and purple, so we knew that he was gone.
It's the Crown's case that the couple were lured to Greenwood Road the night before under the pretence of a potential drug deal. The day before the shooting, the couple returned from a flying trip to Invercargill. Yolanda thought it was a holiday, but found $48,000 in cash in her carry-on bag when the couple flew out of Dunedin. When Detective Constable Samuel Hensman arrived at the scene on the 1st of May, he tried to get as much information out of her as possible. It was difficult working around the paramedics in the ambulance and then the doctors at the hospital, but the policeman wasn't sure she'd survive her injuries. This is his evidence.
In summary, she said the offenders were 2 brothers and that they were Mangere locals. Her husband told her that they are drug dealers, and he said he was going to buy a bag of hard stuff for $5,500. Her husband was shot first. Before this, he ran to her and hid behind her, using her as a shield from the offenders.
The policeman said the couple pushed one another and begged the men not to hurt them. They told them they had a son before Yolanda was shot in the arm.
She continued to beg the offender not to shoot her and had her arms covering her head. The offenders told her to remove her hands from around her head. She said she was scared to do this, but eventually she did, and as soon as she took her hands down from around her head. She was shot in the head.
Detective Constable Hensman said Yolanda had earlier heard one of the men say, "You shouldn't have dropped names." The woman saw her husband get shot and then pretended to be dead on the damp roadside as the men's car drove past several times. She later told the police the two men were Tongan and her husband had met them through family. She said an older man with a hunchback, plaited mullet and angry face shot her husband, and a younger man wearing a black hat shot her. Yolanda, who still has a bullet lodged in her brain, gave evidence last week, but struggled to remember some details and needed frequent breaks. On Monday, she identified two men, Viliami Tani, who pleaded guilty last week, and one of the defendants, Mesui Tufui, who denies being there. The second defendant, Fisilao Tapaivalu, admits he was there that night, but says he didn't get out of the car. The trial before Justice Lang and a jury is set down for 3 weeks. Atuiti ko te mātua ko Annika Smith aho.
The American Civil Liberties Union has condemned the 2-week detention of a 9-year-old Cook Islands girl in California. As Ngāti Puna Re'ala, known as Puna, finally travels home to Atutaki, the girl's legal guardian in the United States says he is furious at the US and Cook Islands authorities. Puna was travelling with a family friend, Mark Pierce, on a holiday when they were separated and detained at Los Angeles on May the 25th. Alex Perrottet reports.
It's understood Puna has left the United States and will arrive in Rarotonga later this evening after a 2-week ordeal during which she's had no contact with her parents or her legal guardian, Mark Pierce. Mr. Pierce, a US citizen, was detained for 11 hours and today says he still had no word from Customs and Border Protection about his status in regard to Puna, and he suspects they're embarrassed about what happened.
They still haven't been verified, and this is over 2 weeks later. They have not talked to her parents, if that's who they want to verify it with, that they signed them. They haven't done shit. And if you think that Foreign Affairs in the office in the Cook Islands has got any integrity or any brains, you're mistaken.
He says he's also furious that the authorities took his iPad, phone and laptop. A New Zealand lawyer and friend of the Pierce family based in San Francisco, Nicholas Spence, has been helping to try and track down Puna in the US and has been asking senators to intervene. They finally tracked Puna down at Southwest Key, a centre for unaccompanied immigrant minors.
What they call the Southwest Kids Program. It sounds all really nice, but it's not nice. And so they were able to confirm that she was physically at this camp.
Both Southwest Key and the caseworker assigned to Puna didn't respond to Checkpoint's calls today. Nicholas Spence says if they were concerned about the relationship between Mark and Puna, they could have made a few telephone calls, but instead they revoked her US travel authorisation.
So that meant that she was illegally in the United States. And that meant that the US authorities could do with this little girl what they deemed probably not in her best interest, but for the profit of these people who are running the detention centres. And that's what's so perverse.
Mohammed Tajsar is a lawyer working with the American Civil Liberties Union, which has also been helping track Puna down and assist the family. He says Puna's experience is unique, as she was not trying to enter the US as an immigrant, but as a visitor. He says it's a travesty, and the US authorities need to explain and apologise.
It's absolutely abhorrent what happened here. Here is a 9-year-old girl whose family and guardian are stressing every day about her status and well-being, even when a resolution is sort of being contemplated, and they were not part of that process, and I find that deeply troubling.
Mark Pierce says Puna's parents have told him that apart from a meeting in Aitutaki on Wednesday with Cook Islands officials, they've been left in the dark. He says Puna's mother, Natuaine, travelled to Rarotonga on the weekend, believing she would meet her daughter at the airport, to no avail. The Cook Islands authorities say they've been in touch on a daily basis with the immediate family. Mark Pierce says he's planning to travel to the Cook Islands in a week or two to visit the family once it's confirmed that Puna has finally arrived home. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
Are you a night owl or a morning lark? Well, if you're a night owl, scientists in the UK and Australia say they can shift your body clock to improve well-being. Teams at universities in Birmingham and Surrey and Monash in Melbourne say basic lifestyle changes can make a big difference. The BBC's James Gallagher has the details.
Each of us has a clock ticking inside us. Our body clock keeps us in time with the rising and the setting of the sun, and it's why we sleep at night. But some people's clocks run later than others. It means life can be hard for night owls. Their bodies are hardwired to stay up late into the night, and a morning alarm clock can force them to get up for work hours before their body is ready. The study looked at 21 people who were regularly going to bed after 2 a.m. They were instructed to get up and go to bed at the same times every day, do so hours earlier than usual, get loads of sunlight in the morning, and have fixed meal times. On average, people shifted their body clocks 2 hours earlier, were getting the same total shut-eye, but were reporting lower levels of sleepiness, stress and depression.
Firstly, it's really important to raise the awareness of the differences we see between people, so our night owls and our morning larks, and help understand that. And secondly, what we're doing is providing some really simple tools, lifestyle interventions that night owls could use to help shift them earlier, and which had a positive impact on self-reported measures of depression and stress and increased performance at non-optimal times.
The researchers said their methods may seem like obvious advice for good sleep hygiene, but they were surprised how effective such relatively simple strategies were.
And that was James Gallagher. Just before we go, some more feedback on our story about the midwife who gave her client saline instead of painkiller and lied to her about it. Mike says your item about midwives highlights their anomalous situation in the health system. As independent contractors to the ministry, they effectively report to no one, unlike GPs or hospital staff. The sooner they are salaried and report to DHBs or PHOs, the better. They will have secure incomes, and expectant mothers can be confident in the midwife that they have selected. Thanks for tuning in today. Don't forget you can check out all our visual stories online. It's been great to have you with us today, and we will be back, of course, tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Defence Minister says New Zealand will gradually reduce its troops in Iraq alongside Australia, with the deployment to end in June 2020. The Prime Minister says Grant Robertson's statement linking the National Party to Treasury hack claims was put out before the GCSB told ministers it wasn't a hack. The health watchdog has described as disgraceful the behaviour of a midwife who gave a woman in labour saline rather than a painkiller. And Air 2 Union says it's extremely worried about its members' safety after 4 serious assaults on hospital guards working for Allied Security. Those are the news headlines. Our next news will be at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
I don't think there's anyone anywhere, including Winston Churchill, who repeatedly mentioned the Soviet sacrifice, that the war would have ended without the Soviet Union.
Live with local, national and international stories.